if our strategy is this for 1 week with our under nines, but then the following week it changes, and then it changes, then it changes. For that boy or girl in that team, it might be like looking at you going, do you know what you're actually doing? Are you planning to, is it just to win the game against the opposition, or are you planning to develop us as players?
Hello and welcome to Coaching Cards. My name's Debbie and today I'm joined by Joe and Danny. We're going to be talking about all things tactics, strategies and systems. I'll kick things off with the first card. What do tactics, strategies and systems mean to you?
I think when I look at tactics, strategies and systems, I kind of think of starting with the why. The why you do it would be the strategy, the how you do it would be the tactics, and then the what will be the systems.
Absolutely, and I think building on that, so possibly start with the strategy first, like the overall game plan. So for an example might be, as a team we're going to go and win the ball high in the opposition half, and then the tactics might be the sort of individual. So an example might be if we're having a 1-4-4-2 diamond, it might be that you want to show the opposition when they're building into our central four, into our diamond. So individually the two centre forwards will have to let the centre backs have the ball and maybe show inside the field. So you start going into individual roles and responsibilities almost to make that plan happen. And then the system, as Danny said, is where do you play, you put your players, so the deployment of your players. And then what starts to emerge is potentially a style of play, certainly over time through repetition and patterns of different ways that you bring all these things to life. So I think it links in with what Danny's saying there, definitely. So why are tactics, strategies and systems important? And then what level of understanding do coaches need to have on them?
I think for me, coaches have to have a basic understanding at the very least, because it links into everything that they do in training, match day. You know, when you think about the invasion game itself, you know, how do we win? How do we develop our players? So that basic understanding of those strategies and tactics is so important. And then I think, you know, as coaches develop, their understanding will obviously deepen, and then they can go into greater detail, I think, with their players as they go along.
Yeah, I think it's really important to have the understanding, but then also the bitting around the format of the game that you might be playing as well, and the understanding of the players that you're working with. So you could have the greatest mind of Serena Wegman or Pep Guardiola, but if you're working with the under-6s, under-7s, do they need that? We do a thing where we go 3-3-3 with the 5 to 11s, where you go, look, we want you to win the ball back within 3 seconds. We want you to provide at least 3 players to be into the opposition third. And then when you win the ball back, just a maximum of 3 passes to try and score. So that's a kind of strategy that you can use, but it's that kidology bit that you don't really need to delve really deep into.
And making sure, I think I've heard from colleagues here at the FA, you know, what's tactically desirable has got to be technically possible. So making sure that it's within the, you know, the capabilities of the group, and it makes sense, the overriding plan that you've got.
So it's trial and error, isn't it? So and just having that, and I suppose that mindset of, I'm going to give this a go, it might not work, but if it doesn't, I'll have a look at how we can change things, how to suit the group. And yeah, that understanding that we'll not know everything straight away, and just be open to learning.
So Debbie, Joe, what should coaches consider when selecting tactics, strategies and systems for their team?
I think you have to link it to the players that you've got in front of you. You know, if you have wide players that are really dominant in 1v1s, you know, you'll have to think of a strategy and a system that will suit kind of their individual strengths.
Back to the discussion around the individual capabilities and linking into the strategy of what we're actually trying to help the players get better at. How can we use our practice design, game formats, a mixture of those type of things in order to create an environment where those things can actually take place and the players can practice them. Age and stage considerations that we've been talking about. So, but also I guess it depends to what level we're tactically getting involved there, because if it's more of a, you know, say PDP performance environment or moving towards a performance environment, then analysis of the opposition might become more important than it is with foundation phase players. We use the word context a lot, don't we? And it covers many things, but I think in this particular instance it's really important, context of the environment that you're in.
Yeah, and what I heard as well when you spoke about age and stage, you talked about planning, but then the opposition bit I think is really critical, because it's not just about the team that you're working with, it's about the opposition as well that you're going against or that you know of. So thinking grassroots level, I've got the under 8s. We know that we're playing against a team that will be in your face from the retreat line. So what can our strategy be to try and go and play out through that? It might be different to the strategy that we used the week before. It's also about time as well. We all can talk about different environments, but if I think about grassroots coaches, I've got these under 8s to under 11s on a Tuesday night for an hour. Usually pretty rowdy, they just want to get on with it. For me to talk about strategy, tactics for the game that they're going to play on a Saturday, it might only be 2 or 3 minutes. So I don't know, maybe a top tip, we might talk about this later about top tips, but give it time, let it evolve, and you're not always going to get all your information out in your training session that you planned for. But the fact that you've given it a go and you're taking time doing it, that lifelong learning for the players, they might take that on.
So the craft of coaching to get that lovely balance between interventions that allow players to develop these things that we've been talking about versus leaving them to breathe and play and have fun and enjoy and have all those sort of experiences that obviously we all know and love with the game that we've got. And I think that starts to explore what coaching craft is in order to be able to create an environment that allows those type of things to thrive. It potentially takes this discussion to another level, I think, as well. So
it's a skill, isn't it?
Yeah.
How can coaches work on tactics, strategies and systems at training?
I think, the beauty of coaching is that the options are infinite. You can focus on the end goal. So if you have a game at some point in the week or at the end of the week, then your training will lead into that. So ideally, I would argue we're looking for transfer from training or practice into games. I guess you could argue, start with the end in mind. And if you ever think about, what you're potentially going to be doing in the game at the weekend, then you can that will inform where you go in terms of creating the training sessions and tailoring it. So once you know what you're moving towards in terms of a game, in my eyes, you can then almost go back down on the journey and start to build your training sessions and the experiences that you want the players to experience in order to then practice ready for practicing within a game environment as well. And
I thought, just going on to what you talked about, the practice design, I think it's really crucial when it comes to using it at training day. And I think if I just use an example, like grassroots, again, 5 to 11-year-olds, it might be the example of that the strategy for us for the next month or 6 weeks is working on overloads in wide areas. So using my practice design at training, how can I get that out in my session? And maybe it's working on the core skills, on whether it be overlaps, underlaps, wall passes, diagonal runs, straight passes. But if you can implement that within your session, but then with the game that you use, whether it be at the beginning or at the end, you maybe put some constraints on there as well. So those constraints could be maybe in your pitch design that it's like a vertical, so you have three thirds vertically, and if you're able to do an overlap in one of the outside thirds, your team gets 5 points. Yeah, fantastic, off you go. And then probably the system, as you said, Joe, depending what space that you've got, if I'm saying 7v7, I've not got 14 players in my under 9s. I've only got 10. So again, how do I use step, for example, players to try and manipulate that?
Definitely. It's just keeping it simple, isn't it? And I think you can argue that, no matter how many numbers you have or the space that you have to train, you can still get out those real clear principles and objectives that you're going after for that game day. And like you said, Joe, working backwards. And just for me, it's just making it game realistic. And players just want to play, don't they? So it's, how quickly can we get them into, those opposed practices where they're playing the game and they can just, have loads of repetition and loads of success that hopefully will transfer onto the game day.
So how can coaches work on tactics, strategies and systems in match day now?
I've always used it that whatever we've done on a training day, we will do it as a warm-up or a micro warm-up on a match day. One way that you may be able to do it is after your training session, if you've got that WhatsApp group, maybe send it. If you're working with the older players, obviously they get it on their phones. If you're working with the younger players, parents will get it so they can see it on the sidelines as well, what we're looking to do, what strategy we might be trying to implement. And then when it comes to the actual match day, hopefully they've still got it in their head a little bit, and we've done the warm-up, that you've got the tactic board, and then you've got individual challenges, unit challenges, and also those team challenges. And again, Debbie, you mentioned it, keeping it simple. So I'm not going to go through match of the day or Monday night football with nodal analysis or anything like that. But as long as they've got something that they can see and feel a little bit, we hope when it comes to the whistle blows, they just go out there and experience it and feel it.
Definitely. I think players need something to kind of hold themselves accountable to, because, like you said, Danny, you know, when you're training and you're putting all these practices on, and then it comes to match day, you wouldn't, well, hopefully you wouldn't do something completely different for them. So it has that, I suppose, that continuation from training day to the match day, and just making it really clear and concise for them. So maybe here are your in possession objectives, here are your out of possession objectives, this is what we're going to stick to, and then at half time you've got those clear ideas of you know, what's going well, what do we need to work on, and yeah, I think having that whiteboard is massive, and just not overloading them, because they'll not remember everything, and it's just layering it, especially with the younger age groups, and having that really clear curriculum.
I think that point around, you know, what's going well, you know, where can we improve, again, is really important. I think you know, there'll be obviously different environments. You'll be able to influence that from the sidelines as the game's going on to a degree. You know, you might be using players that are not actually on the pitch, you know, giving them sort of tasks around observation and feeding back. You mentioned ILPs, often referred to in academies, you know, where you might have individual learning strategies for players as well that will feed into the game. But I think also half time, you know, is a critical moment, isn't it, to potentially support player understanding. So that ability to actually identify what's happening within the game. So for all the things we've been talking about during the week and what's on our session plans and what's in our heads, what's actually happening. You know, it's a very organic thing, isn't it? It's in the moment. So an in-action observations and ability to diagnose what the problems are or how we can set problems for the opposition, I think are really important skills as well.
Do you think, like we've talked about at the beginning of the match day, our time during the match day, but end of match day is really crucial as well in terms of how you can use like strategy. So self-reflection, players, that question, sending them home with. So on Thursday we worked with defending in a really low block to then go and counter really quickly. How do you guys, as a back two, how do you feel that you've achieved your individual challenges? So they go back on that ride home, and that conversation that they can have with their parents or by themselves can also help them with their learning as well. So the match is finished, but the learning is still continuing, maybe with that little subtle questions that you can ask different players to go away and think about.
Absolutely, I think the review bit is massive. And again, there's so many different ways to do it and engage with the players. I mean, going back to one of your previous points, Danny, about you know, using your practice design, so maybe, you know, dividing your pitch into areas and incentivizing good practice or good play around that tactical or strategic thing you're going after might also link to your review. So, you know, some great simple feedback is that if you don't get a shot on target, there's a high chance that you might not have created overloads in channels 2 in order to get in areas to shoot. So there can be feedback for players just through actually working out whether or not they achieve the targets of the session.
Definitely, and some coaches, I think, you know, give players journals and, you know, our little booklets to maybe write their initial thoughts down, because I don't know about you, but you know, after a game, there's so much going on that half an hour later, you almost kind of forget what has happened in those some really critical moments. And if you don't have video footage, you know, you need to kind of, you know, encourage players to maybe document things that stood out for them, because they're going to be in the zone and playing, that they might not be aware of everything when everything's settled down. But I think there's loads of ways that we can use that reflection piece to our advantage. Yeah.
You mentioned about the video. Do you think that's important in terms of when it comes to strategy, tactics and systems for players?
I think so. I think that's kind of where the game has gone to. But like a lot of things, not everyone is going to be able to get their hands on footage, and if the opposition have it, it's a case of building up relationships. Can you share? Again,
it's another good point, isn't it, around, got to be careful we don't make the assumption that everybody's got access to a drone or everybody's got access to, clipping videos and things like that. However, in this information-rich world that we now live in, and industry that we live in, with apps and pundits on TV and footage that's available that people can access. I mean, we see, don't we, in all walks of life that we work in the football industry, coaches skillfully set little tasks, don't they, for players. Go and have a look at the video recording of Match of the Day or something, or listen to what was mentioned on Monday Night Football, or your Champions League highlights. I think with some children that play computer games, obviously has become huge, hasn't it? And massively evolved from certainly when I was younger, and that's a brilliant learning tool, I think. Certainly like Football Manager in some of those games where you can almost align the point you're trying to make based on what you've seen in real time in how they're playing with a game they might have told you that they play at home, so they can go and have a go at it and learn through that way, and you're trying to help them connect the dots. So I think so if there's a lack of resources, there's other ways that we can use sort of educational tools really to help make the point. So I think another thing sort of linked to, we've talked a lot about simplicity and the messaging around tactics and strategies and the system. So I think consistency is a really important point to maybe discuss as well. So again, through different sort of parts of the footballing pathway, it could be an academy football. I've certainly experienced it myself, and in my role come across it a lot, where some academies will use maybe a 6-week block of work for the players to consistently practice a system of play before they rotate onto another system of play. The outcome being for that particular academy will be a broader footballing education, a curriculum that exposes players to different systems, different tactical problems, strategic problems to solve, understanding that as part of the pathway the players might play in all different sort of leagues and different experiences, so the more adaptable they are, then they can thrive.
Going on to the grassroots setting, especially for coaches that might be listening to this, is that being consistent is really good for the players. It gives the players time to learn and practice what you're trying to achieve with them, the information that you're trying to give them. And 6 weeks doesn't sound a lot, but if you think about it in school term, teachers use that as a curriculum. So I know on England FA Learning, they've got 6-week plans that they put out at the moment. So, be happy as a grassroots coach that if you have got a strategy that you are trying to impose, that you might be able to use these 6-week plans as well to help you and support you. If our strategy is this for 1 week with our under-9s, but then the following week it changes, and then it changes, for that boy or girl in that team, it might be like looking at you going, do you know what you're actually doing? Are you planning is it just to win the game against the opposition, or are you planning to develop us as players? And then to throw something else onto that is what the parents might be seeing on the sidelines, like, but you asked Sam to do that last week, but this week you're asking Sam to do something different. Joe, Debbie, do you have any top tips to help coaches quickly understand the strengths and weaknesses of various systems of play? So many top tips.
Well, I think it just comes down to education and that willingness to learn, whether it be reading, courses, things like that.
I think a deeper understanding of the principles of play are crucial, aren't they? The principles of play of this invasion game, which happens to be football, and therefore understanding, even on a simpler level, the system that you're up against will allow you to potentially exploit certain weaknesses in it, or space. And you're looking for where the space or the free players are, and then you're applying the principles of play to exploit those situations. So I think starting with a really deep understanding of the principles of play first will be useful for coaches, especially when they're observing in game time what the opposition's doing and where things aren't quite working for our particular team. It might be a case of really bringing it right down to, look, where's a free player, where's a free space. But I think that in-action observation is critical in my opinion, and I think it's probably one of the hardest things to do, you know, when you're in the thick of something and potentially you become emotional, or you know, maybe your ability to actually analyse what's happening becomes hijacked a little bit by the height of the game.
I think another tip as well that all coaches can do is just like player profiling. So linked to strengths and weaknesses of a certain system that a coach is going after. If you think of maybe playing with wing backs, well, actually the physical demands of playing as a wing back is really, really high. So by profiling your players and have that real in-depth understanding of what they're capable of, you'll start to identify players who can play in that kind of position within that, in that system. So yeah, I think player profiling is really important with this as well.
Just to go on to your point, Joe, you talked about the principles of play. I suppose a top tip that I could give a coach, and this probably be during the match day, just thinking about what you're watching, what's your observation bias, and as coaches we're all guilty of it, is that some majority of it is the ball, watching the ball, where the ball is. So maybe that observation bias is, we know that we're always following the ball. So could it be that you're working with your co-coach, if you're lucky to have a co-coach or a parent with you, that they're looking at the stuff around the ball or off the ball to maybe give you some strategies to maybe think a little bit differently in the way you're doing it. So I could maybe give you an example, is that we're playing a game, we have been done twice on the counter-attack. Maybe the little quick tip or a top tip on that would be, if I've watched it off the ball, it's happening down there. Where's my goalkeeper at the moment? Is my goalkeeper still on their line? All right. That little, strategy there would be, can you play that little bit higher to maybe be that sweeper keeper? And I think just little tweaks like that, maybe seeing the stuff off the ball, maybe can help you find out what your strengths are, but then also what your weaknesses are within your teams. But it works the other way, doesn't it? In terms of looking at the opposition.
So maybe giving roles to your players. Yeah. So almost a captain, or if it's security behind the ball, let's say it's away from the ball and we're potentially vulnerable to the counter attack, and we want to stop that, but then have the ball again to have a second wave attack. Your goalkeeper becomes almost the captain there, or a second coach who's organising behind the ball so that you can concentrate elsewhere. So I think we have to engage our players at all levels in to a lesser or greater degree in that process, definitely.
What advice do you have to help coaches with tactics, strategies and systems when working in different areas of the game?
Keep it simple for yourself, so you actually know what you're talking about and what you're doing, and keeping it simple, especially for those 5 to 11-year-olds. It is that golden age of learning, but if you can keep it simple for them, the rewards is a little bit more higher than if you try and make it complicated. So I'll give you an example that I used, and I've nicked it from Dan Michi, who used to work for the FA. So I call it the 3v3, working with the 5v5 football and the 7v7 football. And it's basically 3 seconds. The strategy is to try and go and win the ball. Then you've got 3 passes to try to break out, to try to score. And the final 3 would be 3 players in the opposition third. So that's my strategy. And then how to do it that's when you go a little bit deeper. So that'd be your tactics. And then obviously the system that you play would be like a 1-1, 2-1, or 1 and a box. And as doing the 1-1, 2-1, it kind of looks like a kite a little bit. So even using the word kite or diamond with those 5 to 11-year-olds, that's your systems done straight away, or using a box, and just keeping it really simple. So I do that quite a lot. And the terminology as well. So Joe, you mentioned about principles of play, and we talk about compactness. No, I want you to make a force field in our defensive box. You make that force field, and once you make that force field, I want you to break out like Star Wars. In terms of disability, I've been privileged to work with Steve Daly over the last 2 years, and What I've noticed in the disability game, again, keep it simple, but I worked with the deaf squad, and just the tactic board and moving the tactic board, simple key objectives for the players to do. Again, it's a good way to demonstrate, especially with deaf players, what you want to get out of the game. But in terms of using your tactic board, also be comfortable as well with doing the demos. You know, don't miss out doing the demos. You know, you can talk all the way that you want, but what I've noticed, or what I've improved on as a coach working with the deaf squad, is that you have to go and do the demo.
Even working with children right up until the 16 or the 12 to 16s and then 16s to 21s, just following on from your points, Danny, you know, we talk about those 6 week of planning blocks and then the spiral curriculum, so actually being age and stage appropriate, using the language and breaking it down for them, so when they get older they're going over the same things but with a little bit more depth and a little bit more knowledge, and there's a little bit more challenge and difficulty, so that as they get older they're building on what they've already learnt in the foundation phase. And then I think for those older age groups, if there is the possibility of having the analysis, those kind of tasks linked to their learning, whether it be training or after match days, I think that's really important. And then lastly, Joe, in terms of maybe the adult game and the performance side of things, is there any advice that you'd give coaches?
I think the opposition analysis stuff is probably the thing that you know, a lot of academies have full-time analysts now, and the amount of work that goes in around that is unbelievable, really. And certainly in the clubs where I work, some fantastic practice with the coaches around repetition and that consistency and almost placing players in game situations that they're most likely to face, whether it's in their academy leagues or if they happen to go out on loan to another club, or end up playing for the first team at that particular club, or end up transferring to another team. Loads of situations that they are going to face in the world of football. So, you know, this emphasis on being an adaptable footballer, not just to adapt to different positions on the field, in and out and with transition, but to adapt to different environments as part of your professional craft. Because hopefully for some of these players, this is going to be their job. And there's a possibility they won't end up doing their job where their training has been, and they might have to go and work in different leagues, different clubs, different countries. So I think adaptability around the environment is critical as well. But I mean, to your point, Danny, around, you know, intervention strategies as well, I think that that clarity requires a demonstration. You know, not being afraid to stop the practice and create really clear pictures that link to your game model, to your tactics and strategies in your system, and then balanced off with things like your ILPs, so individual players, and using trial and error, or potentially, you know, I've heard it expressed as objective-based coaching. So, for example, if we are looking to build the attack, if you have a row of mats in between the halfway line and the opposition penalty box across the field, an objective-based approach might be something along the lines of, within this next period of play, as a team, try and get over that line with controlled possession 10 times. And in achieving that objective, the players will have to come up with different ways to do it. Now, I think you can balance that off with older players with creating clear pictures through demonstration. And I think it's important to have this discussion about, you know, versatile, effective communicators to help young players become adaptable and get ready for whatever's ahead of them in the future. Okay, so to wrap up this discussion, you know, what are our top tips, quick-fire top tips to help coaches develop players around tactics, strategies and systems?
So I would say a top tip, and this is what I'm trying to get better at when it comes to strategy, tactics and systems, is my observation. You know, what am I seeing? And a lot of what I see is the ball. I follow the ball, mainly to do with the amount of football that I watch on TV, the camera follows the ball. So a top tip for me is this: sometimes during a game is spending 10-15 seconds, it's not watching the ball, but observing what's around and off the ball.
I think my top tip then would be trying everything. So trying all the systems, given that really good knowledge and foundation for the players to then develop when they get older, so that during the game they can start to make those decisions if they see something And that only comes through repetition and trial and error and you know, seeing those clear pictures. But I think for me, just giving everything a go, and then when they're older in that performance environment, then it can start to be narrowed down.
I think opposition management, so I've had it explained, or the term sparring partner, which sticks with me quite a lot now, has really sort of impacted on my thinking in recent years. You know, this idea of if we can raise the challenge point provided by the opposition, then it's going to stretch us as we try and exploit our tactic strategies in the system that we've chosen. So for example, if we've decided that we're going to be in a 1-4-4-2 diamond and we're trying to make our way through central areas or get the fullbacks for the width, it might be that the sparring partner, the level of challenge is not right. It's too easy. The opposition are in a 1-3-5-2, but it's too easy. So if you have a co-coach, it might be that the co-coach takes the opposition and raises that challenge point through pressing and more intensity, or a different way of using the wing backs by maybe rolling in field that causes problems for our team to try and solve. It might be that they change the system halfway through the training session or the game. It's that they're throwing things at us to solve. They're creating problems that we have to solve in action, in game time. Get your sparring partner, get your challenge point right.
I suppose that would come down to, when you talk about the diet of football, like running the girls' football team, is that we play against boys quite a lot, because tactically, and the strategy they use is different to the league that my girls play in an all-girls league. We're playing against boys in the league that my girls playing at the moment, the under 11s. They're playing 7v7 in girls football league, but the boys at under 11s are playing 9v9. Right. So getting those friendlies playing 9v9 again, that changes your system of play. 2 extra players, maybe the strategy because of the size of the pitch that you're working on, and then those individual tactics will come involved in as well. So,
and I think game formats, like you've just said there as well, your choice of game formats. I mean, potentially using a mixture of game formats, potentially even on the same night, so that you're creating different types of problems again that somehow link into your system based on the age of the player, but will create problems for the players to solve. And then it's back to all our stuff around coaching behaviours and intervention strategies as to how we manage the players as they navigate their way through solving problems. So, you know, it's so it sort of kind of all comes together, doesn't it, at that point, I think.